Welcome, everyone, to this recording on the history of plastics at parks. Our goal with this session is to provide facts and context about single-use plastics that can help parks and recreation agencies advocate for more environmentally sustainable procurement and waste management policies and practices at parks. This topic of plastic pollution aligns with all three of NRPA's pillars: equity and practice, environmental resilience, and health and wellness, as you'll see in the following presentation.
Hello, my name is Sean Norton, and I welcome you to today's webinar on the history of plastics. The purpose of today's session is to introduce you to the history, the environmental impacts, and best management practices for plastics. But first, we want to introduce our presenters. As I said, I'm Sean Norton. I've spent 35 years with the National Park Service managing sustainability and climate change programs. For the past 15 years, I've managed the National Park Service's single-use plastics reduction strategy, which included developing policy, developing training, and developing implementation practices for parks to reduce single-use plastics. Turn it over to Kara just for a minute to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kara Blumenthal, and I'm a consultant with a company called ICF. And through that work, we've contracted with the National Park Service on the issues that Sean has outlined, so sustainability, climate change, and in particular, waste management. I've been a contractor for the National Park Service for nearly 10 years. Over my course in waste management, I've done everything from being elbow deep in trash, doing waste audits, to conducting greenhouse gas emissions for federal, state, and local clients. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kara. Okay, so we start with a brief history of plastics. Now, many of you may not know that the word plastic comes from a very old Greek word called plastikos, meaning fit for molding or mold to shape. It was first used in English language in the 17th century to refer to materials that could be easily shaped. The term has since evolved to describe a wide range of synthetic materials that are moldable. Most plastics now are synthetic, made from oil and gas feedstocks, but can also be bio-based. We want to take a few moments to introduce you to a short video. This was produced back in 2020 by a series of TED Ed training videos. And this is going to take us through, again, the brief history of plastics. Steph, if you could set that up for us.
Today, plastics are everywhere. All of this plastic originated from one small object that isn't even made of plastic. For centuries, billiard balls were made of ivory from elephant tusks. But when excessive hunting caused elephant populations to decline in the 19th century, billiard balls makers began to look for alternatives, offering huge rewards. So, in 1863, an American named John Wesley Hyatt took up the challenge. Over the next 5 years, he invented a new material called celluloid, made from cellulose, a compound found in wood and straw. Hyatt soon discovered celluloid couldn't solve the billiard ball problem. The material wasn't heavy enough and didn't bounce quite right, but it could be tinted and patterned to mimic more expensive materials like coral, tortoiseshell, amber, and mother of pearl. He had created what became known as the first plastic. The word plastic can describe any material made of polymers, which are just large molecules consisting of the same repeating subunit. This includes all human-made plastics, as well as many of the materials found in living things. But in general, when people refer to plastics, they're referring to synthetic materials. The unifying feature of these is that they start out soft and malleable and can be molded into a particular shape. Despite taking the prize as the first official plastic, celluloid was highly flammable, which made production risky. So inventors began to hunt for alternatives. In 1907, a chemist combined phenol, a waste product of coal tar, and formaldehyde, creating a hardy new polymer called Bakelite. Bakelite was much less flammable than celluloid, and the raw materials used to make it were more readily available. Bakelite was only the beginning. In the 1920s, researchers first commercially developed polystyrene, a spongy plastic used in insulation. Soon after came polyvinyl chloride, or vinyl, which was flexible yet hardy. Acrylics created transparent, shatterproof panels that mimicked glass. And in the 1930s, nylon took center stage, a polymer designed to mimic silk but with many times its strength. Starting in 1933, polyethylene became one of the most versatile plastics, still used today to make everything from grocery bags to shampoo bottles to bulletproof vests. New manufacturing technologies accompanied this explosion of materials. The invention of a technique called injection molding made it possible to insert melted plastics into molds of any shape, where they would rapidly harden. This created possibilities for products in new varieties and shapes, and a way to inexpensively and rapidly produce plastics at scale. Scientists hoped this economical new material would make items that once had been unaffordable accessible to more people. Instead, plastics were pushed into service in World War II. During the war, plastic production in the United States quadrupled. Soldiers wore new plastic helmet liners and water-resistant vinyl raincoats. Pilots sat in cockpits made of plexiglass, a shatterproof plastic, and relied on parachutes made of resilient nylon. Afterwards, plastic manufacturing companies that had sprung up during wartime turned their attention to consumer products. Plastics began to replace other materials like wood, glass, and fabric in furniture, clothing, shoes, televisions, and radios. Versatile plastics opened up possibilities for packaging, mainly designed to keep food and other products fresh for longer. Suddenly, there were plastic garbage bags, stretchy plastic wrap, squeezable plastic bottles, takeaway cartons, and plastic containers for fruit, vegetables, and meat. Within just a few decades, this multifaceted material ushered in what became known as the plastics century. While the plastics century brought convenience and cost-effectiveness, it also created staggering environmental problems. Many plastics are made of non-renewable resources, and plastic packaging was designed to be single-use, but some plastics take centuries to decompose, creating a huge buildup of waste. This century will have to concentrate our innovations on addressing those problems by reducing plastic use, developing biodegradable plastics, and finding new ways to recycle existing plastic.
Great. So, what we're going to do now is emphasize some key points from the video by breaking the history of plastics into more discrete time periods. Let's start with the plastics history from early 1900s to the 1940s. We begin by talking about a man named Leo Bakelite, who had in a laboratory, produced the first synthetic plastic. Leo Bakelite is generally considered the father of the plastics industry. Early applications of this revolutionary product included jewelry, radios, telephones, and electrical insulators. Plastics, as you may know, have an excellent electrical insulation and heat resistance properties. By the 1940s, this plastics had already been in mass production, setting the stage for exponential growth. Now, this is important because as the World War II became into focus for us, there was a very distinct shortage of materials in America. So the US government invested heavily in generating or in increasing plastics production. These included aeronautic parts, vehicle components, radios, and other parts. Essentially, World War II accelerated plastic innovation due to the demand for lightweight, durable materials. We're now going to focus on the period of 1950s to 1980s. During this period, annual global plastic production grew from 2 million tons annually to 35 million tons annually. Disposable items like bags and bottles became common, contributing to waste. This image on your left is actually an advertisement from a magazine, a Life magazine in the 1950s. What was happening is, in fact, the plastics industry had begun marketing to women. And what they were saying is that if you embrace single-use plastics, you're going to make your life easier. In fact, you're going to make have more time in your home because you won't have to clean dishes. You'll just throw this material away. This is really the beginning of the throwaway living concept, which we have embraced. Plastic pollution started to catch the attention of the U.S. environmental movement in the 60s and 70s. And in fact, major litter campaigns emerged at this time to combat a growing environmental issue. Okay, so we're going to move to this time period of 2010 to present. And this slide on your left is just giving you a sense of how globally the leakage of macro and microplastics to the environment has begun. As you can see, back in the 40s and 50s, we were about 2 million tons a year. Remember that. We're now in 2019, or actually, yes, this is the 2019 value, upwards of 460 million tons are being produced annually, and about 22 million tons of that plastic enter the ocean, equivalent to a garbage truck in the ocean every 30 seconds. Now, in the National Park Service, where I worked for many years, the NPS interest in single-use plastics got very serious in approximately 2015 when we began working on a plastics reduction strategy. This included a voluntary program to eliminate single-use plastic water bottles in parks. Making this even a complicated issue, COVID-19 came along and further increased single-use plastic waste, primarily in the healthcare sector, but largely in the takeaway foods industry, and especially this hit us in the Park Service specifically, and in e-commerce. Companies like Coca-Cola and PepsiCo had pledged to increase recycled plastic content in bottles to upwards of 50% by the year 2030, but progress has been very slow and in fact has gone backwards. As of 2025, these companies have decreased their recycled content pledges to 35% and 45% respectively. Fast forwarding to just current times, global negotiations for a legally binding treaty to end plastic pollution are currently stalled after the sixth session in Geneva ended without a consensus agreement in August of 2025. The USA, which had previously supported the treaty, has now proposed removing a life cycle approach to reducing plastics pollution. Essentially, this has become a very political issue. This graph gives us a nice image of how plastics production has grown so quickly. What you see here is in the 40s and 50s, it's predominantly the United States and Europe who are manufacturing plastics. Then in the 70s, Central American and South American countries start to embrace this technology and they're producing plastics. In the mid 80s, China and other Asian nations start beginning plastics. And as we previously stated, we are now in the range of 460 million metric tons of this stuff being produced annually. In the same period, the growth of plastics volumes outpaced economic growth by almost 40%. So plastics in our lives. Plastics are everywhere. They have revolutionized our modern life. They have enabled advances in medicine, food safety, technology, and other areas. The three largest plastics uses in the United States, as shown by this pie chart, are packaging at about 45%, construction about 19%, other uses 25%, and consumer products about 12%. Look around you now in the space that you set. Try to identify the types and amounts of plastics in your space. When I look around my office, I see a TV, a computer, my phone, some CDs. It's virtually become a comprehensive part of my business practices. More importantly, however, the average American generates as much as 2 times the plastic waste than a person in the European Union. We want to pivot now to plastics as a human health issue. I'm going to turn this over to Kara Blumenthal to take us through the next few slides.
Yeah, so it's very clear that plastics are everywhere. They have been found at the top of Mount Everest, all the way to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Some scientists have even called the current age that we're living in the Plasticine, because plastics have become so ubiquitous, so widespread that it's leaving a permanent mark in the geological record. And it's also leaving a mark in our bodies. Microplastics are found in our lungs, our kidneys, blood, and most disturbingly for young mothers like myself, for placentas, in placentas and breast milk. By some measures, adults ingest the equivalent of one credit card per week in microplastics. Surprisingly, though, the study of the health impacts of plastics is still a relatively new field, but the scientific research that we do have has proven that plastics are known to be endocrine disruptors and carcinogens, which can have an impact, on our bodies, impact on reproduction, on cognition, on growth, and various different areas. Plastics also have a real impact on our environment. As we've noted earlier in the presentation, millions of tons of plastics leak annually into aquatic systems. You've probably heard of plastics in the ocean, but plastics also pollute our rivers and our lakes. So plastic pollution isn't just a problem for those parks that are on the coasts, but also for inland parks. Plastics also negatively impact marine species. By some measures, up to 88% of marine species are impacted by the plastic pollution, and an estimated 100,000 marine mammals are killed each year by ocean plastic. Finally, climate change. Because today's plastic is made from oil, the greenhouse gas impact, particularly during that production stage of plastics, is really significant. It makes up close to 3.5% of global greenhouse gases. So to put that more tangibly, as of 2022, the Beyond Plastics campaign quantified the US plastics industry as equivalent to 116 coal-fired power plants. So no plastics presentation would be complete without some pretty horrific photos of plastics. So the first photo on the left is of a creek in California. Of course, on your right side, you see the plastics floating in the ocean. And then the picture in the bottom left is a picture that I took in Bozeman, Montana, when I went to go look at Yellowstone National Park's kind of waste stream and where the waste goes. The plastics from Yellowstone end up at a recycling facility. And so this just shows the mountain of plastics. Not all of these comes from Yellowstone, but a significant portion does come from the park. And it just shows the impact of plastics on our waste management systems, which brings me to the next slide. Plastics is a real issue for waste management. According to the EPA, plastics make up about 12% of the municipal solid waste, but only close to 9% was recycled according to the EPA in 2018. But some measures even put that number lower at a 5% recycling rate of plastics. There are nuances to those numbers. There are many, many different types of plastics. I mean, you're probably familiar with the resin codes 1 through 7 that you find on plastic products. Plastics 1 and 2 are more readily recyclable throughout the United States, so those recycling rates tend to be a bit higher than these numbers, but it's very clear that overwhelmingly, the vast majority of plastics that we manage don't end up being recycled. And that's not because it can't technically be recycled. Really, anything can be recycled with enough money behind it. It really does come down to costs. Is it worth the cost to collect, transport, and process plastics when ultimately there might not be a buyer for those plastics, for the recycled plastics, if the virgin plastic is made from oil and is still very cheap. So plastics are also a waste management issue because plastic is really bulky and it fills up cans and dumpsters in parks really quickly. So park staff are required to collect that plastic, and it really just increases the time and costs to the park. Also, plastics are lightweight, which is one of the great things about them, but it also means that wind can pick it up really easily in an overflowing container, and it can become litter, which again adds additional work and time for park staff. So I'll pass it to Sean for the key takeaways.
Thank you, Kara. So as you can see, plastics have revolutionized our modern life, enabling innovation across industries and touching literally every part of our day. Global production and use of plastics have soared 460 million tons annually, with plastics used in nearly every aspect of our daily life. The environmental health impacts are growing, and they're significant. Only a small percentage of plastic waste is recycled, and millions of tons leak into ecosystems each year. Microplastics and plastics pollution are becoming urgent issues, now found in water, food, and even human bodies. And the solutions are going to require collective actions, policy changes, corporate responsibility, grassroots activism, and driving progress towards plastic reduction sustainably managed. Again, thank you very much for attending today's session. We genuinely appreciate the time you spent today with us, and we hope you appreciate the significance of this issue, and we hope to see you at our future training events. Thank you again.